My contribution to this collective volume is titled Resistance and Repetition. It is a study of Paul Ricoeur's own practice of translation and his reflections on this topic over the course of his work. Starting with an acknowledgement of his practice, his early translations of Husserl's Ideen, the polyglot nature of his career, moving between languages and engaging with their specific philosophical traditions. It is then possible to follow the thread of this practice as it weaves in and out of prominent themes in Ricoeur's thought. In this presentation, I want to outline three major intersections with translation. First, translation appears as a framework for a philosophy and interpretation. Second, translation is presented as a model of dialogue among individuals and of the transfer of meaning between cultures and traditions. And third, translation has an ethical role in the relation between the self and the other. In the first instance, translation serves as a framework for Paul Ricoeur's philosophy and interpretation. To take one example, in Ricoeur's numerous writings on Hegel, he sets out his agreements and disagreements with his predecessor. Following Hegel, he agrees that human experience is meaningful, but insists that our understanding of experience is necessarily partial and finite. In contrast to Hegel's comprehensive view, Ricoeur holds that we cannot reach a perspective from which we could see the whole, for we are always in the midst of things, in the midst of language, attempting to orient ourselves without a view of the totality. The unsettling consequence of this situation is that there will always be multiple interpretations of the world, conflicting interpretations. And yet this state of affairs defines, to use Hannah Arendt's terms, the human condition, the original and inexpungible character of human plurality, reflected in the multiplicity of perspectives and the diversity of languages and cultures. This is the very milieu of translation, of Babel, which Ricoeur understands not as a punishment inflicted on humanity. Rather, he reads the myth as the acknowledgement of an original separation, as he says, without recrimination, lamentation, or accusation. This, he writes in the paradigm of translation, is how we are, this is how we exist, scattered and confounded, and called to what? Well, to translation, end of quote. And this call to translate will echo in a philosophy of interpretation as Ricoeur practices it, based upon the recognition of our condition of finiteness and the partial fragmentary nature of human understanding. Second, translation appears repeatedly in Paul Ricoeur's works as a model of dialogue between individuals and of the transfer of meaning between cultures and traditions. Readers of Ricoeur are familiar with the equivalence, according to George Steiner, between translation and the general capacity to grasp meaning, whether within the same speech community or across languages. Here, to understand is to translate. Every act of comprehension is a mode of translation. But let's consider more specifically the function of translation as Ricoeur applies it to the situation of diverse natural languages and the cultures and heritages that they express. An excellent example of this function is found in Ricoeur's discussion of the future of Europe and the project of creating new legal and political institutions. This will require, he says, a new ethos for Europe, the title of his article, and the transformation of the attitudes of its populations. Beginning with the broad and stark opposition between identity and otherness, us versus them, our nation, our culture, versus foreign nations, foreign cultures, Ricoeur proposes three models of integration to foster the new European ethos. The first of these is translation. This model is especially suited in his eyes to the situation of Europe. It represents a linguistic pluralism, which not only cannot be avoided, but which it is infinitely desirable to preserve, he says. If here too, in the context of constructing a future for the peoples of Europe, plurality is to be praised, echoing early remarks on the original condition. Translation is presented as the bridge, allowing dialogue between languages and cultures. Rather than a national identity constructed around a people locked up within their own linguistic community, Europe of the future should promote a polyglot citizenry whose members are capable of crossing these borders in their everyday lives. Translators themselves will be the flesh and blood mediators, moving between national and regional languages and cultures. Beyond transmitting knowledge and information, Europe will require on a higher level cultural bilinguals capable of engaging in the transfer of traditions, beliefs, modes of being in the world, promoting educational, professional, and artistic exchanges. In addition to the model of translation as a mode of the integration of cultures, Ricoeur proposes the model of the exchange of memories. Here, in the opposition of identity and otherness, the concept of narrative identity applies both to the individual and to the community. Just as the mobile, fluid identity of the individual, ipse identity, is shaped by the stories we tell about ourselves, an identity which is also entangled with the stories of others, our close relations as well as unknown others, so too communities, nations construct their own identity through founding narratives and stories that retrace the life of the community. Both forms of identity are always susceptible to the danger of turning inward and becoming fixed, immutable, rigid, idem identity. In Freudian terms, pathological construction. An exchange of memories is proposed as a means of opening up this narrative constitutive of collective identity in order to connect up with the memories of others, with stories not only of the victors, but of the vanquished, the humiliated. In this way, experiences of the past that have gone unrecognized, lying dormant, may through the exchange of memories be revived in the present and projected toward resolution in the future. Finally, the third model of European reconciliation lies in the practice of forgiveness. It is a response to the tragic history of Europe, the cruelty of its long train of war and unbearable suffering. Forgiveness goes beyond politics, beyond justice, beyond morality. It belongs to the order of charity, love, and to the economy of the gift. This, of course, remains a struggle for the countries of Europe, as it does for our entire globe. Perhaps the first two models of integration and reconciliation must precede it. And as Ricoeur believes, each step in turn must be acknowledged, accepted, and practiced by individuals and peoples themselves, who willingly engage in transforming their view of identity and otherness, of us and them, friend and foe. The third and final topic concerns Paul Ricoeur's formulation of an ethics of translation. The practice of translation begins with an opening to the other, to a foreign language, to another culture, to an original work, and to the world it unfolds. The task of the translator, using the resources of her own language, is to convey to a new audience the novelty, originality, the integrity of the work and its world. Here, Ricoeur would use the term salvage, underscoring the inevitable loss, invoking the work of mourning, while the undiminished drive to translate brings, he acknowledges, the pleasures, le bonheur of translation. The product of this work is, like all things human, fragile, imperfect, and subject to revision. A good translation presents a model of the relation of self to other, in which difference is not reduced to sameness, and the character of the foreign maintains its integrity. This model answers to the concern demonstrated throughout Paul Ricoeur's work with avoiding two pitfalls: the exclusion of the other and the reduction of the other to the same. Through the practice of translation, openness to the other and to the language of the other becomes a form of reciprocity, crossing borders in both directions, welcoming and being welcomed in return. This operation provides a definition for what Ricoeur terms linguistic hospitality, which serves, he says, as the model for all other forms of hospitality. Language indeed is hospitality, and the ethics of translation consists in recognizing and welcoming the other as other. In this way, translation is itself a process of education in the foreign, in otherness, and an initiation into recognition of the other, extending hospitality without assimilation, appropriation, preserving, Paul Ricoeur writes in the final page of the Course of Recognition, a just distance that integrates respect into intimacy. Thank you.